Did the CIA cover up an obscure book on the 11,500 BC Cataclysm? Hi everyone, this is a patron-sponsored video as usual. In this video we look at a weird old book called The History of Cataclysms, the Adam and Eve story by Chan Thomas. A patron introduces me to an old book called The Adam and Eve Story, The History of Cataclysms, 1993 by Chan Thomas, and it's from Bengal Tiger Press, and it's also found on the CIA website in PDF form in a shorter version, or what I think is a shorter version, but I do not have the very rare 1993 work to verify this, which purports to be about 250 pages. Now, I'd like to thank the patron for introducing me to this work. Keep watching to the end and you'll see just how interesting and earth-changing, quote unquote, it really is, because this also involves American and British spies, and you'll find out possibly why. I think I've got a pretty good theory about why this is. As a little aside, I've been asked to promote my conference in July. I'll be presenting for 75 minutes on a vanished civilization, and I can prove it was a civilization in Western Victoria, Australia, of megalithic builders who once built 9-foot-tall megaliths, which have unfortunately been destroyed. So the patron asks, "Hi Dr Kos, what are your thoughts on the Adam and Eve story by Chan Thomas? What's up with the connections, if any, to the CIA? Thanks." And he supplies a link to a series of 3 videos that you can watch, which are a computer voice reading important and crucial excerpts from this book. Now, I had never heard of this author, and his name does seem to be a pseudonym. So I began watching the narrated series of 3 videos, and it went into the usual suspects and subjects. I was thinking, yeah, Velikovsky, Earth in upheaval, 1955, again, Earth tilt, mammoths with tropical food in their mouth, flash frozen, catastrophe. Yep, heard it all before. But then I saw that this author is actually a really top researcher. Inspired by Velikovsky, he decided to find out what the cause was of the catastrophes of the Bible. And I did say catastrophes. If you watch the videos of the Thomas text, you will see that Thomas uses a set of 30 interesting or odd criteria, information current in his day, presumably the 1960s, including what he called the 11,500-year-old catastrophe at Tiwanaku, as well as various instances of crushed-up, flash-frozen mammoths. And he claimed that all of these criteria must be and are satisfied by his theory. He states that the Adam and Eve story, as found in the Bible, was set 11,500 years ago, and that Genesis reads as if it is not from creation, but immediately following some kind of catastrophe. In Genesis 5-7, for example, we read, "Now no shrub had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant had yet sprung up. For the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no one to work the ground. But streams came up from the earth, and watered the whole surface of the ground. Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being." Chan Thomas takes this as the events of 10,000 years ago, or 11,000 years ago, that is 9,000 BC. Note it says water comes up from the earth, and this is similar to one of the descriptions of the Great Flood as it is in the Quran, that streams broke out of the earth during the Great Flood. Thomas takes it that there is a very large gap in time between the Genesis story and the later flood, he claims, of Noah, and that the generations as they are provided in the Bible are not reliable. I think this is a genius idea and probably actually very likely. One could thus see that the world is not made in 7 days, but remade in 7 days following a catastrophe. It takes the catastrophe 7 days to settle down. Thomas states that Adam and Eve leave the garden because they decide to migrate as their country is about to be destroyed, possibly submerged. It is thus the story of migration. He states that this catastrophe is different from the later Moses flood, which came later. So we are dealing with two catastrophes in the Bible. He states that our Genesis is an embellished rather than a literal translation, and that a direct translation of Genesis shows that the events portrayed as somewhat peaceful are actually a lot more catastrophic. Throwing light on this catastrophic age of mankind illuminates some of the stranger ideas found in the Old Testament. For instance, Thomas sees it as a kind of post-catastrophe Hebrew law that inbreeding must occur to save the species. For example, something happens to Lot's wife. He then consummates with his daughters as if they are acting under some legal imperative. And Thomas sees this as a way of perpetuating the survival of the species, if there were low numbers. But then again, there are other explanations. He might just have been a powerful, rich king, and his daughters might otherwise have been outcasts. Who really knows what the laws were like in those times? In a similar way, and highlighting the above, Thomas suggests Eve was actually Adam's daughter, presumably another incestual situation, and this might have something to do with the unknown original sin. We know about original sin, but we don't know what it was, and we're very skeptical about the fact that it was eating fruit. In all, I think it's a genius idea, and Thomas's contribution has clearly been to put Hapgood's ideas into a historical format, an interdisciplinary work which clearly reflects on Velikovsky's style and in honour of the path he blazed. Clearly it's also based on the ideas of Hapgood, which were released in Hapgood's earlier work, but it's a difficult read, and I suggest skipping Hapgood altogether as that book was rushed into publication. It's too long and windy. Now, what about the mechanism Chan Thomas describes? So in the 60s, people were not yet aware of the beauty of the expanding Earth theory. They didn't come up with it yet. So at first it seems that Thomas released a full book, published in about 1965, in a very limited run. That book cannot be found. It was publication was possibly halted. And then there seems to be another one in 1993, but I cannot obtain that work, which is allegedly 263 pages long. It seems to be the full version, and seems to be a more complete version. In addition, he also may have published a shorter pamphlet without knowing the real mechanism of the great catastrophes, and he may have known about them later on. Thomas states he wasted years thinking the sun was responsible, but settled on the mechanism for catastrophe being actually inside the Earth. He states that the layers of magma under the Earth, the different spheres, which have very high stellar-like temperatures of several thousand degrees, are normally stable, but should an instability occur, the ice caps, which Thomas takes to be the stabilizing the lithosphere, would introduce an instability should a shift occur. He sees sudden interference between the layers of the lithosphere as providing sudden lubrication for the crust to shift 90 degrees, pole to equator or equator to pole on the other side. This explains, he says, mammoths crushed to death, together, destroyed, obliterated, suddenly flash frozen, eating happily one day and flash frozen the next. Clearly, this would be the end of the world for every single species. Now, I've augmented the more recent and clearly very good expanding Earth theory with my own shrinking Earth ideas, as some of you know, which may explain the rise of mountains. And you see, one issue with Thomas's theory is what happens to the rotational momentum if the crust should suddenly slip 90 degrees? Does it suddenly stabilize? How? Thomas didn't have expanding Earth theory to explain possibly how such an instability might occur. Now, in our day, we see nothing but stability in day-to-day life, but clearly I think there has been some kind of polar wander, or alternately the ocean currents may have very, very suddenly changed, but I don't see how that could happen so rapidly as to flash freeze something. Looking into the temperatures of the Ice Age, we see huge temperature swings. However, that we do not actually see today wild temperature swings. I made a video before examining the Mammoth distribution, and I used this alone to plot where the pole used to be, and I came to a conclusion of the pole being somewhere between Greenland and one of the Great Lakes. But then again, maybe the ocean currents were simply different. The Atlantic conveyor didn't exist, possibly, and warmer temperatures instead reached Siberia because we see mammoths in Siberia eating possibly tropical vegetation, but not in the UK, which supposedly would be warmer. Then again, I am unconvinced that the mammoth with its shaggy coat is actually a tropical animal, as many suggest. It does seem suited to cold conditions. This is a really complicated topic, as with so many variables unknown, it's almost like we are dealing with a fantasy world when we look at the distant past with our very limited view. Okay, so about the original book, and we'll get onto the CIA. On Amazon is a photo of an old paperback, but it seems to be a pamphlet, and this is what the reviewers state in disappointed tones. They call it a small pamphlet filled with the ramblings of insanity, quote unquote. That's what one person says. And they ask what they are reading, and if this is indeed the original copy or not. It looks like the 1993 version might actually be the real first edition, but one can see that Chan's thinking is a product of the 50s, crust shift, or earth tilt thought of Velikovsky. That is the crust shift theory of Hapgood, or the earth tilt theory of Velikovsky. So what about the CIA connection? So if you Google a PDF of the work, you will find the possibly shorter pamphlet from the 60s, and it's a PDF on the CIA.gov website under a folder called Reading Room. And on the top of each page, it says, declassified in part, sanitized copy, approved for release, 2013, the 24th of the 6th. What the heck is going on? Does the CIA police morality? What's happening? Let's look into this, and I'll propose a theory for what's really going on, because I don't think this sanitizing story washes, and I think I know what's really going on, and it's a little bit disturbing, as you'll see. Now, I see on Goodreads the book gets 3.48 stars, and one commentator called Paul writes, "This book has been pretty popular lately. It was declassified by the CIA in 2013, but only 50 pages were released. Recently, I came across what I think is the full uncensored book." Paul quotes from a Reddit post. "Yes, I met Mr. Thomas in the 60s when he was a guest on a talk show in Kansas City, Missouri. At that time, the book he had brought with him, and the book he had brought with him, and I had got a copy that was like a 30-page pamphlet, not really a book. I spent several hours conversing with Mr. Thomas and skimmed through his book, which I put away for safekeeping, and then later lost in a flooded basement in the early 70s. In the mid-80s, I began trying to find a copy, but to no avail. I had been impressed with the description of a cataclysm, what Mr. Thomas called a tumble, but I could not well remember the details and was hoping to find a copy so I could better relate to others what he was explaining. I contacted bookstores near and far, but again to no avail. Sometime around the turn of the century, I got interested. I began searching again. Lo and behold, a bookstore in England had a copy of a book, quote-unquote, by Chan Thomas entitled The Adam and Eve Story. I immediately ordered it and was astounded when I received an actual paperback book of over 200 pages divided into two sections, The Adam and Eve Story, 127 pages, and The Aftermath of the Adam and Eve Story, 85 pages. This book is a first edition that was published by Bengal Tiger Press in '93 and is much more comprehensive than the short pamphlet I had possessed those many years earlier. I set about to cull from those over 200 pages the basic description of what a cataclysm is. And that small bit is what I posted on a blog that you must have read. I recently had another person contacting me wanting the same info as you, and I scanned the most of it into a PDF file and sent to him, as I will for you. Happy reading. And it goes on. Okay, so that's the story. Is there any truth to it? We probably won't find the truth online, but I have a good idea about why the CIA would have classified this information. To me, it seems like perhaps someone in the CIA was interested in these details back in the 60s. In that era, authors like Velikovsky were taken more seriously than today and actually considered a threat to the established way of thinking. Scholars, university people would literally attack Velikovsky, and they saw him as a threat to their own way of thinking. Charles Hapgood's 1958 theory about the Earth's crust shifting as a response to Velikovsky's Earth in Upheaval 1955, which talks about the axial tilts and mammoths in polar regions flash frozen with tropical food in their mouths, is fascinating. Naturally, it will be possible that Chan's book was classified at some time, so he only had a 30-page pamphlet to share around. Chan also had a very scientific way of putting things, as if one is reading a well-researched scientific paper. My guess is this is because the author highlights the existence, and this is my guess as to why the paper was classified or the book was classified. The author highlights the existence vaguely of an actual mechanism by which the layers below the Earth's crust may suddenly become electrically unstable and shift. And this could be harnessed as a weapon. Depending on which way you want to shift it, results in which country you will affect. You can affect some countries more adversely than others. For example, the equator is spinning a lot faster than the pole, so the tropical regions are going to be impacted more as a result of any changes. Thomas saw the ice caps as placing most of the weight on the Earth's crust and stabilizing its momentum, providing changes do not occur below the crust, which will provide lubrication, causing the crust to suddenly flip about 90 degrees along the north-south x-axis, yet keep spinning along its equatorial y-axis. Now, you think this can't be weaponized? I believe the Soviets were working on just such a weapon, or the CIA were feeding the Russians this as a theory, pretending they themselves were working on it so that the Russians would waste money working on it themselves. This is one of the tactics revealed that was used to collapse the Soviet Union. This is why the book had to be hidden away. For instance, I recall some years back the nationalist, attention-seeking Russian politician Vladimir Zhirinovsky stating on TV, and as seen in newspaper stories in the 90s, that the Russians possessed a weapon to engineer a tilt in the Earth's axis. He said that if anyone messed with Russia, they could tilt the Earth's axis just a little and sink their country, and that they could choose which country they wanted to sink. I'm guessing he read a document about this somewhere. Of course, like modern cosmology, which is done on a mathematician's kitchen table and then released straight to the media, purporting to explain what happened before the Big Bang and how many dimensions there are and so forth, and which lies untested in the realm of fantasy, such a weapon also, I feel, would be in exactly the same category. It remains a mathematical possibility. It doesn't seem to have been tested. It may not exist. It can't be tested. It can't be used. Maybe it cannot be built. It will always be a theory because the consequences of its use cannot be gouged. They may be worse than an actual nuclear exchange. It will always be a theory, a possibility. So that's the reason I think the book was classified. If it was classified, thank you. Well, it seems to have been classified. Thank you so much.